All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Haldis Toppin. I am the moderator for this session. And this session is Summer 2021 Outlook. That's a sponsor panel discussion. On this panel, I'm going to introduce everyone. If you can raise your hand when I say your name so everybody knows who's speaking, that would be great. We have Catherine Strong from the Bureau of Consular Affairs. Thank you, Catherine. Michael James from the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Abigail Palmer from Intrax. Alex Ivanescu from CHI. Kara Mills from CIEE. And Clay Lewis from InterExchange. Thank you. So we have a couple other people on the call. They're helping with tech, just in case you see them. And a couple other things I just want to mention. Everybody is who's not on the panel is muted and their video is off. We will be spending time on some questions that we received from attendees during registration. And then if we have time at the end, we will answer additional questions from those who are listening right now. So go ahead and answer, or add any questions, any comments you want in the chat. And like I said, at the end, if we have time, we will answer them then. If not, we do have plenty of other sessions over the next couple of days that will hopefully answer those questions. And we do have some networking opportunities where you can talk to individuals then as well. So to kick this off, I am going to let Catherine speak from Consular Affairs about an update from her. Go ahead, Catherine.
Awesome, thank you. So I just have a few updates, a few remarks. So first off, good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me to join you. I'm Catherine, and I'm the Visa Policy Analyst who covers Exchange visas for the Bureau of Consular Affairs. So first, some good news. All over the world, as we do every year, consulates and embassies are preparing for the upcoming summer work and travel season. They're working with local institutions to determine program dates and carefully reviewing local conditions, presidential proclamations, and staffing to assess interviewing capacity. Here in Washington, we're conducting a thorough policy review to ensure that our adjudicating guidelines reflect current realities, and we're drafting policy guidance to posts and answering all of their questions. However, as we all know, the challenges this year are greater than any of the recent past. On March 20, in response to all of these worldwide challenges related to the pandemic, we temporarily suspended routine visa services worldwide. This was the first such global suspension of visa services since the inception of the modern visa system. We're truly in uncharted waters. In July 2020, we began a phased resumption of routine visa services, which is being implemented on a post-by-post basis. So as post-specific conditions improve, our missions have begun providing additional services based on a prioritization framework, which culminates eventually in a complete resumption of routine visa services. In the case of applicants unable to be interviewed, we have extended visa application fee validity until September 30, 2022, so over a year and a half from now. Exchange visitor visas remain a high priority in our service prioritization framework, and in fact, many posts around the world are already interviewing and issuing J visas. Of course, the numerous presidential proclamations of the previous year, which were created to protect the American people and the American economy in the midst of this pandemic, have an impact on exchange visitors. Currently, there are 6 different regional proclamations that have no set expiration date. Their goal is to limit travel from areas of the world with sustained high rates of person-to-person spread. They protect Americans and will remain in place until the president determines the risk from these areas to be sufficiently low. The other proclamation that impacts summer work and travel exchange visitors is Presidential Proclamation 10052. That's the labor proclamation. It's currently set to expire on March 31 of 2021. I have no guess on whether it will be extended or not. Every visa adjudication around the world has to consider whether an applicant is exempted from the proclamation or qualifies from a national interest exception. This is automatic and part of the process. If an applicant believes they should be exempted from this proclamation, they should bring a letter stating such and why they believe this to their interview. Every adjudicator knows the process and will go through the necessary steps then to consider an exemption or exception. Pandemic-related travel regulations are dynamic. So on January 12th of this year, CDC issued an order which went into effect last week, January 26th, requiring all travelers seeking to enter the U.S. to have a negative COVID test taken within 3 days preceding travel. Even travelers who have previously received a vaccination for COVID-19 must test negative, and airlines are required to deny boarding to anyone who cannot present proof. CDC's website has much more information on these requirements. They're quite complicated, and this situation continues to develop rapidly, so all travelers need to check for the most up-to-date guidance before flying. Unfortunately, I'm unable to provide a specific date for when each mission will resume specific visa services or when each mission will return to processing at pre-pandemic workloads. So rather than make guesses on timelines, what I can say is that our priorities in consular affairs remain the same. They're excellent customer service while ensuring the health and safety of American citizens abroad and consular applicants visiting our facilities, national security, and of course, facilitating legitimate travel to the United States, which is one of our top priorities and is what we do here. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That was a great update and really actually quite informative. So now we're going to move on to the panel discussion. And to get started, I'm going to turn to Kara. So, knowing the update that Catherine just provided from the Bureau, what does this mean for recruitment, placement, and travel in 2021?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Haldis. I think that we as the sponsor community, working alongside with State Department, we want to remain optimistic, but also realistic. So, certainly Catherine highlighted the importance of this program, but also the very real realities and hurdles that we're facing. And, those hurdles really being those embassy operations, when our visa consular affairs going to resume. And that's a country by country thing, based on, the virus, the other, travel bans and other, what's happening specifically in a sending country. We have the presidential proclamation that is set to expire in March. I would definitely encourage the audience to tune into tomorrow's 2 p.m. Eastern Time session on advocacy updates for more specifics. But certainly, we have ways and pathways forward within that proclamation, given an injunction, and that certainly is that will be a further discussed tomorrow. Also, the travel bans, either limiting visitors from other countries based on where they are, much of Western Europe, South Africa, Brazil, poses concerns, and I think those are really real hurdles. But that said, commenting on recruitment, placement, travel, we know that host employers are interested, and that there is strong demand there. We also know that participants, we anticipate recruitment is softer, but also at the same time that participants, do really value this program, and there has interest. They have, interest. So I think that, when we think about recruitment, placement, travel, we have to try. And we're going to cast this net to try and make this happen. But do know that these obstacles are something that is going to vary by country by country.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and Catherine, and you already kind of touched on the travel bans and restrictions in place. So if you could, how would you anticipate that this could change over the next couple of months? Hard question, I know.
Well, I think the easy answer is knowing that the only thing that's predictable about this virus and this pandemic is that it is unpredictable. And I think much of the audience and certainly the panelists would agree that, the snowball effect of this virus has been huge. And, we're continuing to see as it transgresses what those impacts are. So I think it's continuing to prepare for the unpredictable. Certainly, I think that changes could happen as the virus or variants of the viruses change. We may see shifting or changes to the travel ban in new regions as a result, or travel bans lessening as a result. of the virus, how the virus changes. And I think also that is how the course of the virus changes in the United States, and how that may shift a community's ability, a country's ability, all of that to safely welcome summer work travel participants into the United States. I think that kind of the really important advice on this is, because this is such a ever-changing, evolving situation, is to more than ever embrace a diverse hiring strategy, looking towards multiple sending countries. So communities and host employers looking to hire from a variety of countries rather than putting too many eggs in one basket. We anticipate that, one country may be looking really promising now, but then maybe in a couple of months, the course of the virus changes and that country now has limitations with travel. So I would say it's all changing. It's a very evolving situation. It's hard to fully predict, but setting yourself up for best possible success is really diversifying and looking to, the global world in your recruitment strategy, knowing that, that's also a huge spirit of this program anyway.
All right, thanks, Kara. So shifting gears slightly, we did get a lot of questions from the attendees, those who registered, about COVID and vaccinations in general. And so we definitely wanted to, highlight this component, this concern. So Clay, what kind of vaccination requirements can employers and communities expect?
Thanks, Aldous. It's a good question. I think we are getting this question a lot. Sponsors and the sponsor community, we're all following the expert regulations and guidelines that the CDC has put out, as well as all of the guidelines and regulations from states, local municipalities, and federal agencies. At this time, there's no requirements for vaccines, though Kara did touch a bit on travel regulations and testing requirements. And as the situation develops over the next couple months, sponsors will be sure to keep all of our host employers and community members abreast of any of the changes in requirements regarding vaccines, as well as COVID-19 testing and travel restrictions.
Great, thanks. Yeah, this obviously will be a common theme throughout the summit, is discussing how COVID affects everything. So definitely stay in touch with your sponsors, and just as Clay said, make sure you're staying informed. Okay, so talking about 2021, Alex, how many students can we expect in our communities this summer overall in the United States?
Thank you, Aldous. It's a tough question, but just coming from a country that has been used to overcoming hardship, if you want, with humor, I'll start with a small joke. I will say more than in 2020 and less than in 2019, numbers-wise. But jokes aside, I think the number of summer work and travel exchange participants one community can expect has always been subject to each participant's preference when it comes to location, availability of safe and affordable housing, suitable transportation, culture exchange opportunities, and other unique features of each host community. Historically, the more prepared communities and host employers had a heavier presence and are more popular destinations for our participants. But this year, as we have mentioned, several factors still continue to pose challenges for summer work travel participants. One of the main ones, obviously, U.S. embassies and consulates closures and visa appointment availability, as well as in-place travel restrictions. What I can tell you is that we as sponsors are monitoring these factors closely, so we encourage host employers and communities to reach out to their sponsors for updates. This year, more than ever, will be a community by community case. What I can tell you, what I'm seeing as of right now, the host interest is a little bit higher than the participant interest, but this changes weekly. And we're looking forward for a successful summer. And the moment we get additional updates, we'll share it with each party involved in this program.
Thanks, Alex. So you touched on how the fact that there tends to be more host interest versus participant interest. Abigail, do students actually still want to come to the United States given the current circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, we've all sort of outlined the obstacles that students are facing right now. Like, there are a lot of unknown factors. So it's hard to sort of, go at wanting to come on program at 100% with all of this knowledge for, the unknown barriers that do exist for participants. So I think it's fair to say that we are expecting 2021 to be a slower or a lighter participation compared to previous years. Certainly, hopefully greater than what we've seen in 2020. But students are certainly still excited to come. We're getting feedback all sponsors were talking, and most of us did satisfaction surveys for our participants who were on program in 2020. And thanks to all of the added support from our host companies, from sponsors, from host communities during 2020, we had, on average, a higher satisfaction rate from students that were on program in 2020 compared to previous summers. So I think, in general, they're still wanting to come in spite of these obstacles. But it will be somewhat muted compared to other summers. Oh, I will also mention, sorry, I forgot to mention, we had a lot of rollover participants. So students basically who weren't able to come on program in 2020 due to, various travel restrictions and programs being suspended temporarily. They didn't participate in 2020, but we do have, most sponsors are indicating a decent participation rate of rollover participants who are still wanting to come for 2021 and roll that intention for 2020 into this next summer, which is a good indicator.
Yeah, that is a good indicator. I think a lot of people may not realize that maybe there won't be quite as much of a new interest, but we do have a lot of interest from last year that they still want to come to the United States. So that's great. And kind of along those lines with hosts, we're saying that there potentially is more hosts than there are participants. I'm sure there's a lot of hosts that are listening that are concerned about when should they worry if their participants are actually going to be able to arrive. Do you have a set date? Do you have a timeline for that, Abigail, that maybe you can share?
There's no real set date on this, and I think everything is changing so rapidly right now. So I think the best advice is to really stay in communication with your visa sponsor so that they can advise on what's happening at that time in the countries where you've hired from, and can give a more specific update based on, what we're seeing on the ground in those countries. So no real timeline. I mean, you certainly want to be speaking with your sponsors if you intend to host participants. Now, everyone is certainly in peak recruitment season right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to shift gears again. I'm sure most people on this call, and we did get a lot of questions about this, are wondering, what can I do? What are my responsibilities for the summer and for what's coming up? So we're going to go over this stakeholder by stakeholder. So first, Mike, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what the Department of State and ECA is expecting from their stakeholders this summer?
Well, for the ECA Bureau, we expect that sponsors are definitely making sure to respect respect American jobs, and are vetting placements and vetting that the jobs that exchange visitors fill are not displacing any Americans, are in line with the regulations, but also that host employers are making sure that sponsors are making sure the host employers are ready to have them. I mean, last year it was quite a surprise, and this year we know what to expect, we know what to plan for, and making sure that the participants are aware of the guidance, are ready to follow it, are aware of the risks, the need to quarantine if there's exposure, and they need to limit contact. So we expect that sponsors are working with their host employers, working with housing providers to come up with contingency plans, and that making sure that there's social distancing, that there's masks, that guidance is being followed. But it's really all the stakeholders in the program. I've said this before at past summits and forums, for communities that everyone who's got a stake in the program has a hand in the exchange visitor experience. And sponsors can only do so much, and they really rely on the communication that they're getting from host employers, from housing providers, from members of the community. Members of the community really do have a role to play here, and coming up with helping them be integrated in communities where getting creative if social distancing is still a requirement, and it probably will be come summer. So I know there were a lot of creative activities that they came up with that participants were able to engage in last summer. So I expect that we'll see more of that, and that's a big part of this event. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot more at later sessions today and tomorrow. So I've also got more to say about the Bridge USA program, about feedback from this year. So I'll be talking about that tomorrow at the Bridge USA session 3:45.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, just a shout out for a session tomorrow. We will be talking about virtual engagement with participants. So if you want to learn more about that, definitely take a look at the agenda for tomorrow. Okay, so we want to hear more from the sponsor perspective. What are our responsibilities? Abigail, I'm going to take it back to you for that.
Okay, yeah. So regarding sponsor responsibilities, I mean, we as sponsors are governed by a code of federal regulations. So we're responsible for, ensuring that participants are provided with a suitable arrangement with their job offer, housing, and so that process is governed, like I said, by a code of federal regulation. Many sponsors are also providing additional orientations to ensure, education is key through all of this. So really just ensuring that the hosts and participants are aware of, COVID can look different on the ground in their home country versus here in the US in terms of just policies that might be in place, quarantining requirements, social distancing requirements, and how that's being implemented in the host company and within their housing. And so ensuring that participants are aware of that reality, what that might look like when they hit the ground. That's what sponsors are really trying to prepare for pre-arrival, working with our partner agencies in their host countries, and then within our own orientation materials to prepare participants and host companies of the risk involved, and just educating them to ensure that they're aware of, what the reality will look like on the ground.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so let's hear about what we're expecting from our host employers. So I'm going to give this to Alex and to Kara to discuss a little bit further.
Thank you. Starting first, I do want to mention that at 3 today, Eastern time, we do have a host employer panel where we've invited host employers to speak specifically to their preparations and ability to successfully host participants. And many of those hosts, if not all of them, did have experience in 2020. So I definitely recommend tuning into them, as truly the experts. But to comment briefly on this, I think one of the keys is expectation setting. And, Abby, you said it really nicely, that education throughout. And so looking at the host employer community to educate, or, really to set expectations of participants. A participant may be receiving their placement offer from you in December, January, February now. And as we know, a lot can change between now and the summer in a normal year. And in this year, certainly a lot more can change. So I think communication with your hired participants up until the point of arrival is really important, as their placement and their terms of placement may change as quarantine measures, for example, change, or your safety in the workplace measures may change. Continuing to let participants know what to expect so there's no surprises. And then, certainly along that same vein of expectation setting, communication in general with the sponsor. So if there are major changes that disrupt or change how you may be equipped to support participants, working with your sponsor to help determine the best pathway forward and set those expectations for your participants is really key. Alex, I feel like if you want to jump in there, you lead in there.
Sure. Yeah. As a host employer, you have to think about how you can support a participant in case of local outbreaks, and a possible outbreak in your community, or possibly your business operating under changes ranging from reduced capacities to a complete shutdown. You have to make sure as a host employer that you're in a position to support these participants during these times of uncertainty and a possible financial loss. This will be critical to the success of their programs. What I can tell you in 2020, we have seen a phenomenal response from the host employers when it came to the winter, spring, and summer participants, when it came to assisting the participants during these times of uncertainty and financial loss that they have suffered, when it came to subsidizing housing and other perks they were able to offer, and moral support more than ever as well. The communities have played a phenomenal role, but I'm not going to talk too much about it because hopefully they'll be answered at a later time. What I can also say, and I joked earlier, but we do expect a good number of participants for 2021. It will not be at 2019 levels. With fewer participants coming, though, they will have more open jobs to choose from. So you as a host employer, you have to be competitive when it comes to culture exchange activities, hourly pay, perks offered, housing, etc. So that's pretty much what we as sponsors, we advise you to do for this upcoming season. Okay, Kara, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think those are great points in terms of really looking at the job offer that you have and being competitive, and then also all those COVID contingency plans. And the last kind of tagline that I'd add here is that being in your community, you being in your community are the experts, and we're really relying on you to understand the federal, local, and state guidelines published by the CDC, local health department, specific to your industry and business, and following those guidelines, and making sure that those, again, back to the expectations, everything that we've touched upon today, those are communicated to the participants as best as you can as and the environment continues to change.
Hey, thanks, you two. Yeah, so that's a perfect segue to now talk about the host community, which includes faith-based organizations, Chamber of Commerce's, just normal everyday citizens who are supporting our participants. So Clay, can you elaborate a little bit more on how the host community for these participants can support them during the summer?
Yeah, and Kara and Alex, thanks for those comments. I think, what we've heard a lot today is that communication and education is going to be key. I think that's what helped us get through 2020, and that's what's really going to help for 2021 in this upcoming summer. Keeping communication open and making sure that, all of the participants are educated on what these local requirements look like in your area. And I know community support groups and chambers and associations, and all kinds of stakeholders in the past have played a pivotal role in helping to educate participants alongside, visa sponsors. I think Kara hit it the nail on the head there, in that communities are the experts on the local requirements and resources that are available to students. And we want to be able to work with each of the community members and stakeholders to make sure that these resources get out to participants, the correct information gets out to participants. We all have a unified goal, I think, in bringing these programs to your community safely. But as experts on those local requirements, we definitely, as sponsors, rely on your help to get these resources out to the participants. I can give a couple examples. I think, Social Security offices, are there any updates from your local Social Security office on, how they're doing applications? Is that changing this year? Are there any local police department updates, health department updates, or any other agencies that might have critical information that you'd like to get out to incoming participants? And as the sponsor community, we'd be more than happy to work with each community support group, each stakeholder, and each community to make sure that this information gets distributed effectively to all the participants. I know historically, many communities have held in-person welcome orientations for incoming participants. And we also know that these may or may not be feasible this summer, depending how things go. But we do encourage every stakeholder in every community to explore virtual ways to get this key information out. Haldis mentioned a session that's happening tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard on utilizing technology for participant engagement, which I think is going to be a really interesting way to explore, how we get this, key information out to participants. And I encourage every stakeholder within every community, be it a municipal department, Chamber of Commerce, a faith-based organization, any elected leaders, to partner together with visa sponsors and the U.S. Department of State to work on strengthening the support offered to incoming participants. It does take a village to make this program happen, and every stakeholder plays a key role in making sure that students are here safely and have a great experience once they're here. And I think our opening session this morning, we hit on the great cultural diversity and public diplomacy that this program offers. It also offers great economic impact to each community. But it's important to remember that each of the participants that are coming are going to be ambassadors, not just to America, but to your local communities as well. Be it Myrtle Beach, be it Gardner, Montana, be it, Big Sky. These participants are returning home, having had a great summer here, living and working alongside all of your citizens in the local community. And we want to make sure that, they have a good experience while they're here, that they're supported while they're here. They are going to return home, having those fond memories of their host community, sharing those memories, and hopefully inviting their friends and family to return long into the future. I do, want to hit home. I think Kara mentioned this earlier, but or Mike did. There's a lot communities can do to make sure the students that are coming are welcomed and don't feel isolated if there is any kind of quarantine in place. We saw a lot of communities last summer do organized drive-by, parties and for groups of students that were quarantined, many other fun events, virtual events, connecting the students with the local Americans that are in the community, be it volunteer or other. So that's welcomed, and, that's part of the experience for the students and what makes the program work and makes the students feel welcome. And then education is also key. I think, now more than ever as a community, we need to make sure that everyone understands the reasons why students are enrolling in these programs, why they're coming on the programs, working with your fellow, community members to make sure that all these goals of the program, of Bridge USA programs in general, are shared, with your fellow community members.
All right, thanks, Clay. Yeah, I feel like the communities are a really great way of connector for all the different stakeholders. And especially now with this summer, we've mentioned how things are fluctuating, information's coming in, there's concerns about COVID and vaccinations, but really we lean into the communities as sponsors, but I would say all stakeholders, we lean into them to provide us with that information of what's going on there. So definitely make sure you stay informed and then let your sponsors know. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. But now let's talk about participants themselves. So Clay, sorry, not Clay. I just like talking to you. Kara, can you elaborate a little bit more what we can expect from participants?
Yeah, these are dedicated participants. The ones that are successful to get here are really, really dedicated, and they are looking forward to having an awesome cultural exchange program. And we know that that's going to look different than what we would quote as normal. But we are amidst this COVID era right now, and different is not necessarily better or worse. And so they're here to have that unique cultural experience, and whatever that experience may be will be meaningful. The expectations certainly from the participants, and kind of to wrap up the theme that we have said for the other stakeholders in terms of education expectation setting. Expectations from those participants will be to abide by the rules and the requirements of the program, of those host communities. I think, we are all unified in wanting to run a safe program this year. And, we need to recognize that this is a cultural exchange program. So these participants are coming from a different culture already, a culture that may be having different COVID precautions or different COVID regulations, expectations than what your community may be. We know that communities around the United States, COVID precautions, requirements all look different. So again, our expectation for our participants certainly is to abide by all those regulations, but leaning again and, kind of wrapping that piece up is stressing each important role that the stakeholders play in setting expectations and educating our participants. And then I think just, there are going to be continued unknowns that are greater than maybe the unknowns of pre-COVID era. And so generally, sponsors are advising participants to travel with more money available so that they have appropriate funds to support themselves in case of an unexpected quarantine or some sort of emergency. And, travel with an open mind and flexibility, knowing that this is going to take communication and, continued collaboration amongst all stakeholders for a successful program. But ultimately, those that get here are dedicated, excited for the program, and, with the right resources and education that all stakeholders are providing to them. We're feeling really confident from the lessons learned in 2020 that we can get those, we can accomplish that together.
Thank you, Kara. If I may add a quick note here, coming from a former participant perspective and seeing over years, what has been done and what is being done for the participants' well-being and safety and success of their program, I would just like to say thank you for everybody on this call, for everybody involved. It's just amazing, even though they don't know the whole backstory for their success, just from a former participant perspective, I'd like to say thank you. And looking at the numbers of people attending today is just amazing. So yeah, that was it on my end.
Oh, that's sweet. Thanks, Alex. Okay, so, we've gotten a lot of questions and concerns from our audience about what to expect when it comes to layoffs and furloughs for hosts. So we wanted to touch base on that. So Clay, what are the vetting requirements for hosts that have experienced layoffs or furloughs due to the pandemic?
Sure. And per the regulations, program participants are not allowed to displace U.S. American workers at any work sites where they're placed. Areas where some work travel students are placed are traditionally seasonal communities where there's a very short-term seasonal peak need for employment. Some work travel students help supplement the available workforce in these communities. And each season, sponsors must confirm that this criteria is met prior to placing any students in these communities at any job. Visa sponsors must also confirm with the host employers that they've not experienced any layoffs in the past 120 days and don't have any workers on lockout and strike. Program participants provide very critical support to host employers during their peak season, and the placements are always strictly seasonal or temporary. And I do want to note that these regulations have not changed from years past. These are the regulations, that have been out for years, and we do confirm this information every year. And as an employer, you'll have to make sure that all of your local staff have been offered their jobs back, and you'll have to pass the vetting process with your designated sponsor to verify all of this information.
Great. Sorry, go ahead. Did you have anything more you wanted to add to that, Clay?
Nope.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a pretty clear answer, and that I know that has been a concern. So if anybody on this call wants more details about that process, please do reach out to your sponsor representative and they can kind of walk that through with you a little bit more. Okay, so a common concern every year, it's not just the COVID year, is housing. So one question that we had is, if we do not have secured housing, will we be eligible for international students this summer? So I'm going to take this to Abigail. Can you answer that question for everyone?
Sure. I mean, part of program regulations is the availability of suitable and affordable housing for participants, right? So this is in any given year that's part of the requirements. There is a significant highlight on the importance of this, given COVID, being a factor. Also, in our vetting, sponsors are doing increased vetting with host companies who intend to host in 2021. And we've already mentioned that there is a bit more competitiveness given, the extra hurdles that participants are facing coming. So there being potentially more demand from employers versus participants, or participants available to come on program. So with that in mind, I mean, I certainly would be highly considering your housing and the package that you're offering participants, to ensure that all of these things are considered for their summer, for them to be coming over this summer, that all of these factors have been part of this process and part of the package that they're being offered. So, yeah, I mean, part of regulations is that they do have affordable and safe housing. That being said, it's an even heightened emphasis on housing being a priority this summer.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Mike, I know that you will be touching on this tomorrow during the Bridge USA session, but can you give us a brief overview of numbers from summer 2020 and winter 2020, 2021?
Yeah, from a look at the Student Exchange Visitor Information System, SEVIS, database records, there were about 6,000 who came on program during the summer last year, meaning anybody who was still active May through September. And more than half of those actually included people who had stayed beyond the prior winter, spring season. So it would have been much lower just based on those who normally arrived for the summer. And then for this current winter, there are about 200 or so. So contrast that with 2019 and 90,000 for summer, 15,000 for winter. It was much lower. But I will be going into more of the details by community and location and other details tomorrow at the Bridge USA session at 3:45.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to transition to some other questions that we did receive from our attendees. And I noticed there are a couple other questions in the chat, so we're going to do our best to try to toggle between all that. But one question I wanted to ask is, that we received from someone is, in this crazy, uncertain time of pandemic, is there a financial risk to the students if their visit is canceled at any time? A valid concern. And Kara, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to not speak too specifically, because each sponsor, each international representative that sponsors work with have different refund policies. I will say, as a sponsor community, we all are being as generous as possible during this uncertain time. There are certain financial obligations that are out of our control. It's, the fees for the embassy appointments, travel to embassy appointments that are, harder within our control as students progress down that. But in terms of program fees and refunds, every sponsor international rep is a little bit different. But certainly, again, I think the buzzword that I'm bringing up today is expectation setting, and certainly sponsors and international representatives are coaching participants through the process of what they can expect throughout the process, while very much taking in consideration the financial risks that they're taking as they go through this process.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm noticing that in the chat, we are having several housing comments and questions, and actually we had some previous housing questions as well. So one that I think I'm going to touch on real quick is, are there any new regulations on housing specifically regarding the type of housing, and are there any specific COVID related rules on dorm style living, which is actually a very good specific question. Because I know there was one comment to try not to be too vague on how we answer. Is anybody on the panel who would like to take that? Clay, I see your
Yeah, I can do that. Housing is a tricky situation, and I see another question about the availability of housing as well, and making sure that it's suitable and affordable. The CDC has a lot of guidance available right now on congregate housing and congregate dorm style housing, and I highly recommend everybody on the call who does have questions about safety and COVID safety regarding housing. Check out the CDC's website. They have very detailed information on what they recommend, especially during this time of COVID-19. Regarding the availability of housing, sponsors are looking at this very closely. Every placement, we have to make sure that our students have housing, that it's safe, that it's affordable, that it meets regulations, local codes, local ordinances. We take that very seriously. And prior to making any of these placements, we make sure that, the students are going to be taken care of, that they do have appropriate housing. And I know it was mentioned earlier, but I also want to mention that tomorrow, I believe at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard, there's going to be a really good discussion about housing from a couple operators of some larger housing complexes on what they did to prepare in 2020 last year and what they're doing to prepare this upcoming summer. So I highly recommend anybody with a lot of questions on housing, especially as it relates to safety and preparedness, join that session, and they're going to be taking questions as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This will be a wonderful panel discussion tomorrow. And I think one thing to drive home is that, communities have their own regulations when it comes to housing. It could be county, it could be, village, it could be state. There are obviously some sort of federal guidelines. So that's why it's a little hard to be too specific right now. But I do suggest everybody who has concerns about housing to join us tomorrow on that session. One question I also see is, do participants, they're covered by medical insurance? That is a regulatory requirement. But does their coverage take care of possible COVID testing and possible hospitalization? Is there anybody on this call or on the panel who would be willing to take that? Kara, go ahead.
Yeah. So regulations stipulate at least a minimum of what sponsors need to provide for insurance. And, really it's a travel, illness, accident type of insurance package. Each sponsor's insurance offerings do vary. Just like insurance is complicated for Americans in the United States, there are certain levels of insurance and complications and confusions around our participants' insurance as well. But, generally speaking, I would say that that's the best question for your sponsor. And generally speaking, every situation is unique. But certainly from experience, and, other sponsors can chime in here, there is, COVID-19 is under illness. And so the answer isn't no, but it is more convoluted than just a simple yes, because of every insurance policy being different and every individual situation being different.
And also American healthcare system.
And in the American healthcare system, for sure.
Related to that, we did get a question. Can exchange visitors get a vaccine in the United States once they arrive? Does anybody on the panel have the answer for that?
It's a good question. I'm also wondering the same, if I can get a vaccine. So it's a very fluid process right now. There's a lot of new information on vaccines coming out every single day. This information and information about vaccines is changing daily. So, again, I think that's a question that participants, hosts, should direct to their sponsor on, guidance on that. And, as sponsors, we're going to, keep everybody informed as new information comes out on vaccines and availability and how all that works.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and there's a great, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has more information on that. As we know, it's like everything else, like housing. Each community is different. I can say from where I am, the county is doing it one way, and then my town is doing it a different way. So we can't really give an answer on that, but we do encourage community members and host employers to really just stay on top of that, not only for participants, but for your employees as well. Your other American employees, as well. And then similar to that question, regarding pre-flight testing, to your knowledge, panelists, are tests widely available in major J1 sending countries, especially since this is now a requirement that they have to take a test and have it be negative before they travel to the United States?
I can give that one a shot. I think it's, of course, it varies from country to country. And, we have a team of individuals that work with all of our international partners based in these sending countries. So we are in communication, with them to understand what that looks like on the ground. So I think in general, I would say, yes, we are seeing positive feedback on availability of testing in sending countries. That's a general statement. So of course, there are going to be countries where it's a bit more of a challenge, but in general, some of these countries are actually more advanced than the US has been in terms of availability and frequency of testing to citizens. So it's not sort of a blanket statement. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add, but in general, I would say it's positive feedback.
I would agree. Very positive feedback, and kind of related to that, Bloomberg also has a very good resource available. You can Google it. The Bloomberg COVID-19 tracker that is tracking vaccines and other information and its availability around the world. So that's another good resource to check out.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's constantly changing. So definitely make sure that your participants are staying on top of what's going on in their own country, again, in their own community, within their own country, to see what that availability is. But we are very hopeful that all our participants will be able to get a test so they can come to the United States. And so we have 4 minutes left. We'll see how many more questions we can take, but I do want to take this one right here. Last year, we had students who came in February get stuck here when travel restrictions were put in place. Because of COVID, many hospitality businesses understandably closed, so the kids were stuck here without jobs. Some lost housing for not being able to pay rent. Are there any provisions in place for 2021 if students get stuck again? Any of the sponsors, of course, Department of State, if you, Mike, if you also want to comment on that as well, you can, but anybody on the panel, go ahead.
I can certainly jump in briefly. We touched, Alex and I touched a little bit on this. I think it's really, again, it takes a village. Somebody said that today already. I think Abby may have said that, but, from the host employer sponsor side, I think it's really talking through as you're making a commitment to participate on this program this year, given the uncertainties, working through those contingency plans with your sponsor and, looking at your resources as a host employer, your resources as a community, alongside your sponsor to talk about those worst case scenario situations. I think that, the comments that we've had about housing and, not just being an important part of a package for a participant to attract them to the job, but also being a really important safeguard in some cases in these situations. We definitely were caught off guard, I guess, a bit with this winter and how quickly things snowballed, and have learned a lot. I think it's also, certainly the sponsor community continuing to work with State Department and your community to track any kind of concerning trends so that we could get ahead of it. But again, I think it's really coming down to host employers, communities working with sponsors on contingency plans so that we are taking that it takes a village approach to support participants and be ready should should that happen. And I hope that I can say safely, should that worst case scenario happen again. We have certainly learned a lot.
Yeah, and Mike, I'm not sure if you also had something you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, it was really difficult circumstances when so many thousands couldn't get home at the end of their programs last year. And that resulted in, first time ever, we extended the summer travel program in other categories to allow participants to remain active and not overstay and be able to continue working and be able to support themselves. So, that's definitely one thing we've advised sponsors to be ready for. If we reminded them of that in November as they were doing vetting, to be able to support them. We ask employers to be flexible if they can offer extra hours, if that's possible. There were great stories about employers who allowed them to continue on in housing last year. So much unknown, but we definitely recommend contingency plans in that case, the worst case scenario.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and one thing that we've also found at Green Heart is the participants who are arriving are those who have really planned ahead. They're ready travelers, so that part of that means is what Kara said earlier, making sure they're financially prepared for that, saved up enough money that if something happens in the United States, that they can take care of themselves, as well as just, making sure their general well-being is taken care of. But we have learned a lot from 2020 and continue to learn throughout 2021 how we can adapt as sponsors and as communities. And so I know there are still some other questions that have been dropped. Some of them are for consular affairs and other individuals and entities. What we'll do is we'll share that with Catherine and other people who have presented today, and we'll be presenting later today and tomorrow. And like I said, there are other opportunities to ask these questions in networking sessions and in other listening sessions that hopefully everyone can attend. I want to thank all our panelists. I want to also thank everyone who's attended so far. Hopefully some of your questions have been answered. And then I just want to give a shout out to our next session, which will start at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this session is called How We Support the Summer Work Travel Program from the Chamber, DMO, and Industry Associations. So you'll get a little bit more specific community information during the session, and this will be moderated by Clay. I'm about to drop the link to that Zoom, and we'll see you in an hour. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Hollis.
Bye. Thank you, Hollis. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.